Chosen ones, ignore these prophetic days at your own risk. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the letter arrived in plain brown paper, slid silently under Daniel's apartment door just after dawn. He noticed it only when the edge caught against his bare foot on the way to make coffee. The handwriting inside was shaky, almost frantic, as if the writer's hand had trembled with every stroke. Chosen one, your life depends on what you do this Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Do not ignore this. The city's safety depends on you. Daniel read it twice, a frown tugging at his brow. Chosen one? It sounded like the opening line to some doomsday cult recruitment pitch. He chuckled under his breath, tossing it onto the kitchen counter with a casual flick. Probably a prank from one of the tenants upstairs. But then, as he poured his coffee, he caught sight of the uneven smear at the bottom of the page, a blotch of red that wasn't quite ink. Instinctively, he lifted the paper closer. The faint metallic tang clung to his fingers, lingering even after he washed them. All morning, the scent followed him on the subway, at the office, in the quiet moments between phone calls, like an unshakable reminder. That night, just before bed, the news anchor's voice cut through the hum of his old TV. We're getting breaking reports of a sudden and unexplained blackout affecting the entire East Side. Officials have no explanation at this time. Daniel froze. The timestamp on the report matched exactly what the letter had said. On Monday morning, Daniel stood at his apartment door, letter in hand, debating whether to follow the next set of instructions. Do not walk the usual path to work. Take the bridge instead. It felt ridiculous, like letting a stranger dictate his morning commute. But the memory of Friday night's blackout wouldn't leave him, and something about that smear of red still gnawed at him. Against his better judgment, he slipped the note into his jacket pocket and headed toward the river. The wind off the water was sharp, carrying the scent of rain and rusted steel. Halfway across the bridge, Daniel slowed, glancing back toward the route he usually took. That's when he saw it, a column of black smoke curling into the pale sky. In the distance, flames licked at the twisted remains of an exploded fuel tanker. Sirens wailed, faint at first, then rising in a frantic chorus. The street where his bus would have been was now a chaos of shattered glass, overturned cars, and orange firelight. Someone had known. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, meaning to call the police, but before he could, it buzzed in his grip. A new message appeared on the screen. Tuesday will be worse. Prepare. No Zenda Nama. No number. Just the words, pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat. Daniel's mouth went dry. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Tuesday's warning came at dawn. A single line glowing on Daniel's phone screen. Do not go indoors between 1 o'clock and 1:30 p.m. No greeting. No explanation. No number to reply to. He tried to tell himself it was absurd. People went indoors all the time. But the memory of Monday's burning bus route kept replaying in his mind like a broken film reel. By midday, the weight of the warning had settled deep in his gut. When the clock struck 12:55, Daniel stood in the open-air plaza between the high-rise offices, hands buried in his coat pockets. The winter air bit at his face, and the wind curled around the buildings like it knew something was coming. He watched the minutes crawl toward 1 o'clock, his stomach a hard knot. 1:03. Somewhere far above, a bird startled from its perch and vanished into the sky. 1:05. A deafening crack split the air. For a fraction of a second, the world froze. Then every nearby window erupted outward. Glass exploded into the plaza in glittering sheets, catching the sunlight like silver hail. People screamed, ducking, covering their heads. Shards whistled past Daniel's ears and clattered against the stone at his feet. He could smell the acrid tang of dust and scorched wiring. If he had been inside, sitting at his desk like he normally would at this hour, he wouldn't have made it out alive. As the chaos unfolded around him, his phone buzzed again in his pocket. He didn't want to look, but his trembling hand reached anyway. Wednesday will be the hardest to survive. The final note arrived just after sunrise, slipped under his door like the first one. The paper was damp at the edges, as if it had been clutched in a sweating hand before being delivered. At 3:17 p.m., you must be at the old clock tower. If you're not there, hundreds will die. Daniel read it 3 times. The clock tower had been boarded up for decades, a relic from the city's industrial past. Nobody went there anymore. But the certainty in those words, the same tone that had already saved his life twice, left no room for hesitation. By mid-afternoon, the city was unnervingly bright. The winter sun cut sharp shadows between the buildings as Daniel pushed through the crowd, his breath ragged. Every streetlight seemed to watch him. Every stranger's glance lingered just a little too long. 3:11. He was still 3 blocks away, weaving between honking cars and oblivious pedestrians. 3:15. The clock tower loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the sky, its cracked face frozen at a time long past. The plaza around it was deserted, the kind of silence that feels arranged. 3:16. Daniel stumbled onto the steps, his lungs burning. The heavy wooden door stood ajar. Inside, dust motes floated in beams of light from the broken windows. At the base of the tower's spiral staircase sat a small black case, no larger than a lunchbox. A faint ticking came from within, too steady, too deliberate. No police, no bystanders, just him and the countdown. 3:17. The tick quickened like a heartbeat sensing its end. Daniel swallowed hard, every muscle in his body screaming between 2 impossible choices: run or open the case. He could run. He could leave it there, pretend he never saw it, let someone else, someone trained, deal with whatever danger lay inside. But deep in his gut, beneath the fear and the pounding adrenaline, he knew this was the moment all the warnings had led to. This was why he was the chosen one. His hand shook as he crouched beside the black case. The ticking filled his ears, almost in rhythm with his heartbeat. Sweat stung his eyes, and his breath came in quick, shallow bursts. With a final, sharp inhale, Daniel pried the latches open. No bomb. Instead, nestled inside a bed of black foam, was a compact device no larger than a paperback, its surface matte and cold. A single red light pulsed slowly at the center, like a watchful eye. Next to it sat a small flash drive with a strip of masking tape across it. 3 words were scrawled in blocky, hurried letters: "Play me." Every instinct told him not to, but he was already pulling it free, already running back to his apartment, laptop under his arm. When the drive clicked into place, his screen went black. The speakers hissed with static before a voice emerged, low, distorted, and mechanical, as if it had been scraped through a dozen filters. "The tests are over." A pause. "You passed." Daniel felt his skin prickle. "Welcome to the real work." The red light on the device began to flash faster. The next morning, Daniel awoke to the faint rustle of paper against the floor. Another envelope had been slid under his door. This one completely blank, no return address, no marks at all. Its weight was light, almost empty, but something about it made his pulse quicken. Inside was a single black card, thick and smooth to the touch. In the center, silver embossed letters gleamed faintly in the early light. "The others are waiting." Daniel turned it over. On the back, in hurried, uneven handwriting, was an address, a place he knew only from passing. Headlines and urban legends. The old train depot on the city's edge, abandoned for over 20 years after a derailment, had left it cursed in the eyes of locals. By late afternoon, he stood before its rusting gates. The wind whistled through broken windows, and the distant creak of metal echoed like footsteps that weren't there. Inside, the vast hall was swallowed in shadow. Graffiti clung to the crumbling brick walls, and old tracks disappeared into darkness. That's when he saw them. 5 figures standing in a loose circle, half hidden in the gloom. One by one, they stepped forward. Their faces were wary, but their eyes held a strange familiarity, as if they had all walked the same invisible path to get here. In low voices, they began to speak, telling stories that mirrored his own. Mysterious letters slipped under doors. Precise warnings that saved them from death by seconds. Days filled with impossible choices and unseen watchers. When the last one finished, a tall woman with a scar across her jaw looked at him and said, almost as a greeting, "We are the chosen ones." Daniel felt the weight of the moment press down on him. "And Wednesday," she added, a small, grim smile tugging at her lips. That was only the beginning. One of the strangers, a tall woman with a jagged scar cutting across her left eye, stepped forward without a word. From the folds of her worn leather coat, she pulled a tightly rolled piece of parchment, bound with a strip of faded red ribbon. When she slid it across the dust-covered table toward Daniel, the room seemed to hold its breath. The parchment was old, its edges fraying and its surface yellowed like something salvaged from fire. As he unrolled it, the brittle fibers crackled beneath his fingers. It wasn't a map. Not exactly. It was a calendar, hand-drawn, its ink faded in places, smudged in others. The next 3 days were circled in thick crimson, the marks so forceful they had torn faint grooves into the page. "These," the scarred woman said, her voice low and steady, "are the black days." Her gaze swept over the group, lingering on Daniel. "We've all survived the first set. That means the real trials begin now." In the margins, Daniel noticed scrawled notes, the same jagged, frantic handwriting from his first letter. Some lines were barely legible, fragments of warnings, numbers that might have been times, and short phrases like "under the ash" and "don't trust the bells." A cold weight settled in his stomach. Only one thing was certain. If they failed to act, the consequences wouldn't just be another blackout or an isolated disaster. This time, the entire city might not survive the month. And now, for the first time, Daniel realized something chilling. Whoever was guiding them had been planning this for far longer than he'd thought. That night, Daniel was torn from sleep by a sharp, relentless pounding on his apartment door. The sound wasn't just urgent, it was desperate. He stumbled out of bed, heart hammering, and yanked it open. A young man from the group, thin, wild-eyed, and drenched in sweat, stood there, breath hitching like he'd sprinted the whole way. His hands trembled so violently he could barely keep them at his sides. "It started," he gasped. "The first test. Now." The words jolted Daniel awake faster than any alarm. He grabbed his coat without thinking, and the two of them tore into the night. The streets were eerily empty, the kind of silence that feels arranged, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Their footsteps echoed off the walls as they cut down narrow alleys and across desolate intersections, guided only by the young man's frantic urgency. When they reached the warehouse, it looked abandoned, windows boarded, rust creeping up the corrugated metal walls. But the massive double doors were chained shut, the lock thick and rusted. From inside came faint, muffled sounds. At first, Daniel thought it was machinery. Then he realized it was voices. Crying. The woman with the scar emerged from the shadows, a pair of lockpicks already in hand. She knelt by the chains, working with quick, precise motions. The moment the final shackle dropped, the doors groaned open, and Daniel's stomach turned to ice. Inside, dozens of children were huddled together, wrists bound, faces streaked with tears. Their eyes found the light from the doorway and locked on him with raw, unfiltered terror. Then Daniel saw it. High on the far wall, a digital timer glowing in blood-red numbers. 1,500 hours. The countdown had already begun, and whatever happened when it reached 0, he knew it would be worse than anything they'd faced so far. They freed the last child with only seconds to spare. The timer on the wall hit 0:03 when the final set of ropes fell away, and the group herded the terrified children into the cold night air. For a moment, they all just stood there on the cracked pavement, panting, hearts pounding in unison. The adrenaline was so thick in Daniel's veins that it took him a few moments to realize something was wrong. He scanned the group. The scarred woman, the tall man in the leather coat, the older woman with silver hair, the wiry figure hunched over catching their breath, but not the one who had banged on his door tonight. The young man was gone. The scarred woman caught the flicker of realization in Daniel's eyes. Her expression hardened instantly, shadows deepening around the scar that cut across her face. "He's not one of us," she said flatly, the words carrying the kind of finality that made Daniel's stomach twist. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. No number, just a notification for a live video stream. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The screen flickered, grainy and dim. The young man was there, standing in a dimly lit room, the parchment map spread open on a table before him. He was speaking to a man in a perfectly tailored black suit, his features swallowed by shadow. Only the faint glint of a silver-tie pin caught the light. The man in the suit took the map, examined it briefly, then slowly turned his head toward the camera, toward Daniel. Even through the distortion, there was no mistaking it. The man was looking straight at him, and then he smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of the mouth, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The feed cut to black. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. The enemy now knew every date, every step on the parchment. And if the look in that man's eyes had been any indication, they weren't just planning the next attack. They were planning something personal. The final circled date had come, the last of the Black Days. According to the brutal parchment map, disaster would hit the city center at exactly midnight. No details, no hints, just the place and the time. By 11 p.m., the chosen ones were already in motion, splitting up to scour rooftops, alleys, and underground tunnels. The air was razor cold, and the streets carried that unnatural stillness that Daniel had come to recognize as a warning. Daniel's path took him back to the old clock tower, the same place from that terrifying Wednesday when it had all begun. The sight of its cracked stone face looming above sent a shiver through him, but there was no time for hesitation. He climbed the spiral staircase 2 steps at a time, his flashlight beam slicing through the dust. At the top, the beam landed on it, a massive device bolted directly into the tower's inner mechanism. Wires snaked across the gears like veins, pulsing faintly with power. A digital display glowed, 30 minutes and 12 seconds. The mechanism was wired to strike exactly at midnight. The blast radius would easily cover the entire city square below, the heart of downtown. His earpiece crackled, the scarred woman's voice coming through in quick, clipped words. Cut the red wire. Only the red. Daniel pulled the panel open and froze. Every single wire inside was red. Dozens of them, all coiled together, their shades slightly different but under the dim light, nearly indistinguishable. Below him, the massive bronze bells began to stir. Gong. 11 o'clock. The vibration rattled the metal casing, the sound rolling through his chest. Gong. 11:30. The display ticked down. 00:29, 00:28. Sweat slid down his temple. His breathing slowed as he tried to shut out the sound of the bells and focus on the faint differences in the wires. One frayed here, another wrapped tighter than the rest. Then he closed his eyes. Instinct. That was all he had left. The knife in his hand pressed against one wire, thin, slightly warm to the touch, and with a sharp snip, it parted. The device let out a long, dying hiss, the glow fading from its display. The ticking stopped. Below, the 12th bell rang out, echoing over a city that had no idea how close it had come to vanishing. The lights across the skyline stayed bright. The streets remained still. The danger was gone, for now.